He stood at the altar every Sunday, preaching salvation, a trusted figure, a man of faith. But behind the robes, he was hiding a deadly secret, an affair that shattered vows, a jealous husband pushed to the edge, and a double homicide that left a quiet town reeling in horror. This is the story of Father Michael Brandt, and the forbidden love that turned a sacred place into a crime scene. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of human behavior, where love, betrayal, and murder collide, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We uncover the truths others fear to tell. He was a man of God, respected, beloved, and hiding a secret that would lead to a double homicide. This is the story of Father Michael Brandt and the deadly affair that shocked a small town to its core. It began like many stories of faith do, inside the silence of a confessional booth, a woman seeking forgiveness, and a priest offering more than just salvation. Her name was Clara Weston, 38, married, lonely, searching for something, anything, to make her feel whole again. Her husband, Daniel, was no stranger to darkness, a man with demons of his own, and a growing suspicion that something was slipping through his fingers. What started as whispers turned into meetings. What began as counsel turned into comfort. And what was meant to be sacred became something sinful. Then 2 gunshots, one night, and the perfect image of a peaceful parish shattered forever. The question wasn't just who pulled the trigger, but why. Was it a crime of passion, of faith, of desperation? And what role did Father Brandt play in the violent end to a marriage and a life? How does a man sworn to celibacy become the center of a double homicide investigation? This is not just a story about murder. It's about the masks we wear, the truths we bury, and the secrets we carry even into holy places. The town of Maple Cross wasn't the kind of place where things went wrong. Not publicly, at least. Tucked between rolling hills and farmland, it was a place where church bells rang every Sunday, where front doors were left unlocked, and where secrets, when they existed, rarely made it past the porch. The heart of the town was St. Helena's Catholic Church, stone walls, stained glass, and the same wooden pews that had held 3 generations of families. For many, it wasn't just a place of worship. It was home. And at the center of it all was Father Michael Brandt. He was 62, soft-spoken, charismatic, a man who remembered names, birthdays, and the faces of those he'd baptized, married, and buried over his 30 years of service. To the children, he was a storyteller. To the elderly, a companion. And to the lost, a shepherd. His sermons were never fire and brimstone. They were gentle, reassuring, as if he understood your sins and had forgiven them before you even spoke. He attended every fundraiser, every christening, every vigil. If there was pain in the community, he was there, in silence or in prayer. In Maple Cross, there were 2 kinds of men, those who worked the land and those who carried the word. And Father Brandt, they believed, carried it with grace. But what no one saw behind the collar, behind the smile, was a man unraveling in private, a man with desires he could no longer confine to prayer. The story of what happened next doesn't begin with a crime scene. It begins here, in the quietest town you've never heard of, where trust was absolute and betrayal unthinkable. Her name was Clara Weston, 38, soft-spoken, private, married for over a decade to a man the town knew well, Daniel Weston, a contractor with a sharp jaw, a shorter temper, and a quiet intensity that unsettled some. Clara was known to most as devout, reserved, always sitting in the 3rd pew from the front, hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore her faith like armor, and behind it a heart quietly breaking. After a miscarriage and a brief stay in therapy, Clara turned to the one place that had never let her down, her church. And there, she found Father Michael. At first, it was routine. Weekly confession, whispers behind the lattice screen. She talked about her grief, her loneliness, her guilt, and Father Brandt listened. But something shifted. The boundaries blurred. The confessional became a place of comfort, a place where pain met compassion. And then, something more. It started in silence, but soon turned into late-night phone calls, long drives to nowhere, and secrets exchanged in dimly lit parking lots. They were careful, or so they thought. To the outside world, she was still the devoted wife, he the devoted priest. But behind closed doors, they crossed a line neither could ever uncross. For Clara, it was intoxicating to finally be seen, heard, cherished. For Father Brandt, it was dangerous. But he believed, in his own way, that what they shared was love, that somehow God would understand. But God wasn't the only one watching. Daniel Weston, the husband left behind, had started noticing the changes, the late returns, the whispered phone calls in the hallway, the distance in his own home. And when he followed her one night, what he saw would ignite a storm that no one in Maple Cross was prepared for. Because once Daniel knew the truth, everything changed.
Suspicion is a slow poison.
And for Daniel Weston, it had already taken hold. He stopped shaving, started missing jobs. He was drinking more, sleeping less. Neighbors noticed his truck parked outside St. Helena's long after services had ended. At first, people thought he was just going through something, stress, money problems, but those closest to him saw a shift. He began showing up unannounced, to Clara's work, to church, always quiet, watching, waiting. Then, the first note arrived. A folded piece of paper slipped under Father Brandt's door at the rectory. No signature, just 5 words printed in thick black ink. Stay away from my wife, or die. He told no one, not the bishop, not the police, not even Clara. But the fear, it lingered. He started locking his doors, avoiding eye contact, cutting his sermons short. Clara noticed the change. She begged him to walk away, to end whatever it was they thought they had. But by then, it was too late. One evening, just before dusk, a neighbor walking her dog passed the rectory gates and saw Clara standing outside, crying, clutching something in her hand, her eyes red, her voice shaking. She left without knocking. 2 hours later, the lights in the rectory went out. The next morning, Clara didn't show up for work. Dan didn't answer his phone. And by sunset, the police would be at their doorstep. Inside, 2 bodies, blood smeared across the tile floor, a phone off the hook, a single crucifix shattered on the kitchen counter. And on the wall, scrawled in something thick, dark, and unmistakably human, was Father Brandt's name. This was no longer a secret affair. This was a crime scene. October 17th, a Thursday. At 10:47 p.m., a call came into the Maple Cross Police Department. The voice was panicked, rushed, shaking. A neighbor, concerned after hearing what she described as 2 loud cracks, then silence. She stepped onto her porch and saw the front door of the Weston home, slightly ajar. I think someone's been shot. Oh my God. There's blood everywhere. Please send someone now. First responders arrived within minutes. The scene was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, the house smelled of gunpowder and something else. Metallic. Heavy. Clara was found first, slumped over the dining table, a single gunshot wound to the chest, her face still frozen in fear. Dan's body was nearby, collapsed on the kitchen floor, gun in hand. A second shot, this time to the head. There were no signs of forced entry, no sign of struggle. But what disturbed investigators most was what they found on the wall behind Clara. Written in blood, smudged, but unmistakable. Brandt. At first glance, the answer seemed obvious. A domestic tragedy, a murder-suicide, a husband pushed too far, a wife caught in betrayal, and a priest's name carved into their final moments. But the evidence wasn't so tidy. The angle of the wounds, the position of the bodies, the fact that Dan's fingerprints weren't on the gun, but someone else's were. And then, the kicker. Father Brandt had no alibi. He claimed he'd been at the church rectory, alone, reading, praying. But his phone had pinged near the Western home just hours before the murders. And when investigators brought him in for questioning, his hands were trembling. What began as suspicion was now spiraling into accusation. What looked like a closed case was about to fracture wide open. The initial autopsy reports came back, and with them, a problem. Ballistics showed 2 different firearms were used, one for Clara, another for Dan, which meant the early theory of a murder-suicide no longer held. Someone else had been in that house. Then came the phone records. Clara's call log revealed dozens of conversations with Father Brandt in the days leading up to the murders, most of them late at night. Some just minutes apart, some just minutes before she died. He hadn't told police about any of them. Investigators searched further. Security footage from a gas station across the street was pulled. A hidden camera mounted above the air pump aimed straight toward the Western house. At 4:42 p.m., just hours before the shooting, a dark sedan pulled up and parked across the street. The driver, Michael Brandt. He sat there for 11 minutes, never getting out, before driving off. Questioned again by detectives, Brandt shifted his story. Yes, he admitted, I was near the house. I was there to talk. She sounded upset. But that's all, he insisted. I never went inside. And yet, the physical evidence painted a different story. His fingerprints were found on the doorknob. Traces of gunpowder on his sleeves. A piece of torn fabric near Clara's body, matching the lining of Brandt's coat. It no longer mattered what he said, because the evidence was beginning to speak louder. He wasn't just involved emotionally. He was now part of the scene. And the story he was telling was unraveling faster than he could keep up. But forensic truth, like sin, has a way of rising to the surface. And what they discovered next would leave even the lead investigator in stunned silence. In a town built on quiet traditions and Sunday sermons, the news hit like a lightning bolt. A priest, 2 bodies, a forbidden affair, and now forensic evidence tying him to a murder scene. Overnight, Father Michael Brandt went from being a shepherd to the suspect. The headlines were relentless. The killer cleric? Sins of the cloth? His photo, once hanging in the vestibule of St. Helena's, now splashed across every TV screen and homepage in the country. Outside the church, camera crews lined the sidewalks. Microphones were shoved into parishioners' faces as they exited Mass. Some turned away in tears, others turned away for good. Attendance dropped by half, confessions stopped, Donations dried up. And inside the chapel where he had once baptized newborns and comforted the dying, a silence took root. But the town wasn't just grieving, it was divided. Some clung to belief. This must be a mistake. He was a good man. He helped us. Others were furious. He lied to us, to God, to everyone. One lifelong member of the congregation, a woman who'd known Father Brandt for 20 years, said quietly to reporters, "We trusted him with our souls. Now I wonder if we were blind." Protesters stood outside Sunday service, holding signs, "God forgives, but should we?" The diocese issued a brief statement, cold, procedural. Pending investigation, Father Michael Brandt has been placed on indefinite leave. No apology, no support, no defense. In the eyes of many, he had already been convicted, not by a court, but by a community that once called him their own. And inside the rectory where he once wrote sermons, he now waited, alone, watched, and whispered about. But the investigation wasn't finished, because there was still one detail no one could explain: the second gun, and who it belonged to.
Just when investigators thought they had their suspect,
The case twisted again. A groundskeeper at St. Helena's, clearing brush behind the rectory fence, noticed something odd: disturbed soil, a patch of earth that looked too fresh. Beneath it, wrapped in canvas and plastic, was a second firearm. Ballistics confirmed it. This was the weapon used to kill Clara Weston. And it was registered to someone no one expected: her older brother, Marcus Duval, a retired army sergeant, quiet, reclusive, protective to a fault. He hadn't spoken at the funeral. He hadn't shown up to the police station. In fact, he'd left town the morning after the murders. Was he involved, or had his weapon been stolen? When they brought him in, Marcus insisted the gun had gone missing months earlier. But then came something else. From Clara's phone, a deleted folder, recovered by forensics. Inside, text messages, voice memos, notes, evidence that Clara had been planning to leave them both, Dan and Father Brandt. She had applied for an apartment 2 towns over, spoken with a divorce attorney. She even confided in a friend. "It's over. I can't live in this triangle anymore." She was getting out, walking away from the secrets, from the men who couldn't let her go. But she never got the chance. Someone made sure of that. And the truth, the real truth, wasn't hiding in a text, or a gun, or a headline. It was still in the shadows. Until one person stepped forward and finally said the words no one expected: "It was me." The confession that changed everything was next. 7 weeks after the murders, Father Michael Brandt walked into the police station without a lawyer. He sat down, folded his hands, and gave a statement that would upend everything investigators thought they knew. He admitted it. Yes, he had been at the Weston home that night. Yes, there had been an argument. He said Clara was panicking. Dan had found the messages, the phone calls, the meetings, everything. Brandt claimed Dan had become violent, pushed Clara, screamed at her, threatened her with a gun she kept hidden in the bedroom closet. Brandt said he tried to leave, that Clara begged him to stay, that Dan grabbed her, that she screamed, and then a gunshot. He told detectives, "I didn't pull the trigger. I swear on the altar of God, I didn't." He said he rushed to stop the fight, that Clara had the weapon in her hand, that she fired in fear. Dan went down. Brandt claimed he reached for him, grabbed his sleeve as Dan fell. Blood splattered, Screams echoed, and then silence. He said Clara collapsed to the floor, trembling. He tried to take the gun from her, but she pulled away. She was shaking, hysterical, saying she'd go to prison, that no one would believe her. According to Brandt, she raised the gun again, and before he could stop her, the second shot rang out. He ran, left the scene, buried the second gun behind the church, threw his coat into the river. He ended his confession with a whisper. "I loved her. I never meant for it to happen like this."
But the detectives weren't satisfied.
Because the blood on Brandt's sleeve didn't just place him at the scene.
It matched the exact spatter angle consistent with a close-range shooting.
Forensic analysis showed a partial fingerprint on the trigger guard, smudged but distinct.
And it wasn't Clara's.
Suddenly, the story Brandt told no longer matched the evidence.
So the question remained, was this a crime of passion gone wrong?
Or a carefully crafted lie, built to protect the one secret he couldn't confess, even now. On the morning of the trial, the pews in the courtroom filled faster than the ones he used to preach to. The state charged Father Michael Brandt not with murder, but with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. They couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he pulled the trigger, but they could prove this: he ran. He buried the gun. He tampered with evidence. He lied. The prosecution called it a coward's escape. The defense called it a broken man's panic. The jury was left with one haunting question. Was he a killer or a coward? For 3 days, they deliberated. Outside, reporters camped on courthouse steps. Inside, Clara's family sat stone-faced, holding a framed photo of her last Christmas alive. When the verdict came, silence fell. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of murder, guilty on charges of obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. Gasps echoed. Some sobbed. Others stared forward, stunned. Father Brandt showed no emotion. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in state prison, the maximum allowed under the charges. But the real blow came next. The diocese stripped him of his priesthood, his title, his collar, everything. No appeal, no statement, just a quiet removal. And when Clara's family was allowed to speak, her sister stood up. Her voice didn't shake, her hands didn't tremble. She said, "You robbed us of the truth. Maybe you didn't kill her, but you let her die in silence and ran from the light you were supposed to serve." There was nothing left to say. The courtroom emptied, and the man once called Father was led away, not in robes but in chains. In the months that followed, Wexley Hollow was never the same. The once bustling St. Helena's parish, where weddings, baptisms and confessions echoed for decades, stood nearly empty. Attendance dwindled. Donations stopped. Families left. Some said the building felt cursed. Others said it simply felt hollow. 1 year after the verdict, the diocese made it official. The church would close its doors. A black and white photo captures its final moment. Plywood across stained glass, a for sale sign hanging crooked by rusted wire. A symbol of faith, now boarded up like a forgotten relic. Father Brandt served just under 4 years, early release for good behavior. He never returned to Wexley. Today, he lives in isolation, a rented cabin in the outskirts of another county. No visitors, no sermons, no collar. Some say they've seen him wandering the woods at dawn, clutching a rosary. Others believe he's moved on, forgotten. But in the town he left behind, memories don't fade so easily. Clara's family still visits her grave every Sunday. Dan's relatives refuse to speak his name. And a community that once trusted a man in robes now locks its doors and its hearts a little tighter. Was Father Brandt a victim of circumstance or the architect of destruction? Let us know what you believe in the comments below.